This is part 2 of a series we're continuing on with today. It's something that we began last week. If you remember, I presented it on video, and it's because I couldn't be here with you last week because the week before that, I had been quarantined. My wife just told me I couldn't leave my room. Legit, like she actually told me that, and so I couldn't. And I mean, I snuck out a couple of times, but I felt like a teenager, but I had been on a trip where several people had tested positive for COVID, and so I had to be quarantined, but I ended up testing this past Monday, and I was negative, and so thank you for all of those who are praying for me, checking on me. I appreciate that. But it's a very real thing, and so I'm watching other people experience it and go through it is a unique experience, and it's kind of brings everything into focus a little bit. So if you are here for the first time, or if you didn't catch up last week, I highly recommend you going back and watching that message, because a lot of what we're going to talk about today will make a little bit more sense if you go back and catch up with us. That's kind of the way we kind of break things apart and split it into weeks, but it's all kind of like one big message. And so that's kind of the way we process and think about things. But we're talking about this idea of biblical justice, okay? So this is the word that we're discussing in this series. But I say biblical because it's not just about social justice. It's not just about, an American idea, or, this thing that we do. It's not just about, setting people straight and, taking people to court and all of that. All of that is packaged, kind of a package deal. That's part of it. But the reason I call it biblical justice is because this is an idea that is literally thread all throughout Scripture from beginning to end. I mean, it literally is an idea that's been around. It's a concept, a biblical concept that's been around since the beginning of creation. And so the Hebrew word, I know you really wanted to know this, but the Hebrew word is mishpah, okay? I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but I'm pretty sure it's mishpah, okay? You can correct me later if I'm wrong, but this is the Hebrew word. So in the Old Testament, this is how it shows up in the Hebrew Bible and in what we call our Old Testament. And so there's a couple of different forms that it takes. And so every once in a while, you'll see it take kind of this form because it shows up a lot, but it'll be retributive justice. In other words, the kind of justice that we often think about, where, the oppressor ultimately gets punished, or somebody who is treating people unfairly gets their due justice. And so, that's part of it. That's retributive justice. But more often than not, throughout Scripture, it is referring to restorative justice. And that's really the idea that we're talking about in this series. Restorative justice is bringing restoration and peace and wholeness to somebody else's life. Restorative justice is seeing something that needs fixing in somebody else's life and being willing to provide justice. In other words, seeing an injustice and being willing to step in and take things to action, put action to those words, and actually bring restorative justice to restore something in somebody's life. And we talked about it last week. We said this is basically restorative justice looks something like this. And not to oversimplify it, but we gain wisdom, and this is the way Scripture talks about it. We said last week, again, go back. I promise it'll be worth it. We gain wisdom in order to know what justice is, in order to see and be aware of injustices so that we can restore shalom, another Hebrew word, the Hebrew word for peace. But really it means completeness or wholeness, and it's a reference to every single part of creation, and certainly every single aspect of your life and my life. And so shalom is ultimately the goal. Justice is how you get there, because shalom has been broken in all of us because of that being sin. But in every part of our lives, and this is what requires some wisdom to see this, and that's why we have to gain wisdom, because it may come at an emotional level for somebody, or financial, or physical, or spiritual, or relational, or whatever it is, maybe professional, in some area of their life. It's the wisdom to be able to see an injustice, to see something that is broken, to see someone who has been pulled from the fabric, so to speak, and separated. And our goal is to then not just know it and see it, but to administer justice in that situation and in that person's life in order to restore shalom. And so that's what we've been talking about. Well, hopefully you'll go back and catch up with us because I think that'll be very worth it. But today, today I'm going to throw another wrench in there, and I want to talk about this word, mercy. Mercy. Now, this can seem a little paradoxical. It's like, I thought we were talking about justice. Mercy sounds like kind of the opposite of justice. It's like, well, I thought we were talking about justice. Why are we talking about mercy? And they seem like they're opposing ideas. And yet, when you read through Scripture, what you begin to see is that these words, mercy and justice, actually, oftentimes in the very same sentence, these ideas, though, are put together. They go hand in hand. In fact, as you read through Scripture, you realize that you can't have one without the other. You can't have justice without mercy, and we need mercy in order to have justice. And so I want to show kind of how this fleshes out. And so oftentimes where you find this, because you'll find this especially in the Old Testament, this idea kind of threads throughout, but definitely in what we call the prophetic books. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but there are major prophets and there are minor prophets. It's kind of how we think of them. And these prophets were sent by God. This was, a good 2,500 or so years ago, somewhere in that ballpark, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, somewhere in that range, okay? So a big, broad scope. But God sent prophets in order to deliver his message to the people of Israel, okay? And so that's what they were there to do. And oftentimes you'll find this idea of justice and mercy in what the prophets were sharing with the people of Israel. When they would give a warning, they would give some instruction, and oftentimes it had to do as much with how they loved and cared for people as it did with how they loved and managed their relationship with God. In other words, those two things went hand in hand. So justice and mercy are very important. Well, Zechariah was one of these prophets, and in chapter 7, he puts these words together. And here's the way Zechariah said it. And again, he's saying that this is what the word of the Lord is. The Lord has spoken to me, and I'm sharing that with the people of Israel, okay? And here's what Zechariah says. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless or the foreigner or the poor. Whoop, it skipped a verse. This is what the Lord Almighty said. Administer true justice. Show mercy. Administer true justice. This is Zechariah speaking to the people of Israel. Administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Do not plot evil against one another. He lists kind of these he's kind of ballparking and creating this large category of people, basically people who were oppressed and kind of cast out and pushed to the side in their culture and their society. And see, this is this was something that the people of Israel had struggled with for centuries at this point. I mean, this was the people of God. And so they had been given, this was the children of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and God had created this nation, this group of people, in order to follow him. And the way that their interaction and their relationship went between Israel and God was supposed to reflect that to the rest of the world. Well, Israel had struggled with this idea of kind of combining justice and mercy with God's law. They knew God's law. They knew how they were supposed to treat one another. They knew how they were supposed to care for and take care of one another and love one another. And yet they struggled. Why? Because people, and we deal with this today, people who had the power and who were in authority often twisted justice for their own benefit. And instead of caring for those who had great need, they would use them to their advantage. And that's oftentimes what we struggle with too. And so God, what he did with the people of Israel is he would exercise justice. He would come in and he would say, okay, well, I'm going to withdraw from you. I'm going to take my blessing from you, and there are going to be people that come in and that conquer you. And sure enough, that's what began to happen. And I mean, literally not 100 years or so after kind of the golden age under Solomon's reign of Israel, around 900 BC. I mean, real quickly, things went south, and the kingdom split, the kingdom divided because God had withdrawn himself, and so now there's a north and south kingdom, Judah and Israel, and so people began to conquer them. And literally it was like over and over and over again, so much that they began to even lose their identity, and they began to be dispersed and deported, and they were forced to live in different countries and different foreign lands, and they didn't know even who they were. And so their relationship with God was this very kind of out there sort of thing, and there just wasn't a lot of understanding. And yet then, after God administered justice, he would step back in, and then he would show mercy. He would show mercy by sending his prophets with messages, and he would say, this is what you need to do. Yes, I have brought justice to you because I am God and you're my people, and you have rebelled against me, but I am willing to continue to love you and to care for you. And so these prophets would step in, and they would remind Israel of their sin, remind them of the things and the ways that they had rebelled, but they would also remind them that God loves them and that God is faithful and he is true to his promises. Well, Micah was another one of these prophets. Micah, you may not be terribly familiar with Micah, but maybe you're more familiar with Isaiah. They actually lived at the same time, somewhere around 700 BC, so like 2,700 years ago. These prophets were on the earth, and they were speaking God's message to the people of Israel. And Micah came in doing the same thing. And so all through his book, we call it a book, it's really just words that he wrote down that he believed God had spoken to him. He reminded the people of Israel of what God had done for them. Once again, of all the blessing and the thing that he brought you out of oppression, he bought you out of slavery, and that he fed you and he clothed you and he gave you water to drink and he provided for your needs. And then, this is in chapter 6, and he's kind of reminding, and this will be maybe a little bit more familiar phrase or verse to you because it's become kind of a famous verse. The words of Micah have actually become famous. Maybe you didn't know this is where it came from. It almost just sounds like, something from popular culture because we're so familiar with it. But when Micah spoke these words to the people of Israel, this was life-changing. This was a big deal. This was like an aha moment. This is, okay, well, now we get it. And so Micah kind of steps in for the people of Israel, and he speaks on their behalf, and he asks God this question. He says, well, God, what do you want from us? Like, if that's what you've done for us and you're reminding us of that, you're reminding your people of that, then what do we need to do to bring justice to this? Do we need to do some more sacrifices? Is there some practices that we need to implement? Maybe some burnt offerings, maybe even a willingness to give up our own children for your sake. Would that do it? And of course, Micah knew the answer to the question. It was really a rhetorical question. And so he answers his own question for the people of Israel. And this is what he said. He, God, has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? Is it the sacrifices? Is it the rituals? Is it, burnt offerings? No. It's to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That's what God requires. That's it. You see, you've gotten really good. God's saying, look, you've gotten really good at all of the religious practices. Matter of fact, you're experts. You really know how to do this. You've gotten the sacrifices down and you know how to follow. There's kind of a state religion, so to speak. And you know how to do that, but you've lost your way somewhere because there's an emptiness. You see, all of those religious practices and all of those things you do, they're meaningless. They're like an empty shell if they don't translate into how you care for those who are poor, those who are oppressed, those who are hurting, those who are without shalom. And if it doesn't trickle down into your heart, then it's just like a facade. And that's the danger, and that's what has happened to you. So I don't need all of that. What I need you to do is actually begin putting this stuff into practice. I need you to care for one another. I need you to do justice and to love mercy. To do justice and to love mercy. And the only way you're going to do that is by walking humbly, losing the pride, putting that aside. 700 years later, Jesus shows up on the earth. And he begins accusing some of the people of Israel of some of these very same things. It's been centuries now. And it has been this cycle of back and forth of, Israel's rebellion and God's restoration and his restorative justice and mercy. And yet Jesus is now speaking these very same things, but this time he's specific and he calls out really the religious leaders of the day. And more specifically, more often than not, he's talking to the people called the Pharisees. You're probably familiar with this. Now here's what you need to know. The Pharisees, when we hear that word today, if you grew up in church and you've heard Bible stories, you've read your Bible at all, it's like the word Pharisees shows up and we immediately think, evil, terrible, opposer, the enemy of Jesus, enemy of God, hypocrite. I mean, those are the things we think of. Matter of fact, it's a derogatory term. We even say it, you're so self-righteous, you're such a Pharisee, it's, he's being pharisaical. You've heard this probably. Well, this is where it comes from, but the thing is, in the first century, to first century Jews, that would not have been their immediate thought, okay? They were highly revered. I mean, these were experts. They were considered, hey, these are Bible experts. These are people who know the law, who live holy lives. I mean, these are people held in high regard. And so we need to listen to them. And so for Jesus to show up on the scene and begin to accuse them of not being true and faithful and holy and set apart, when he calls them a brood of vipers, when he accuses them of hypocrisy, it probably caught many people off guard, including the Pharisees. And so that's what you need to know. This was taboo. For Jesus to step in and begin saying these kind of things was just crazy talk. And yet he did. And so in chapter 23 of Matthew's gospel, he records, maybe you've heard this before, he records several what we call woes, because they were like woe statements. And so Jesus would step in and he'd say, woe to you, people of Israel, woe to you, Pharisees, this is what you've done wrong. This is what it looks like. And he would call them even whitewashed tombs at one point. But there's one in chapter 23, verse 23 and 24, where it kind of gives us the gist of all the stuff that he's saying here. And here's what Jesus says. He's accusing the Pharisees and he speaks to them. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. There's our word. Not a term of endearment. You have neglected the more important matters of the law. Justice, mercy, and faithfulness. There they are again. You should have practiced the latter, being justice, mercy, and faithfulness, without neglecting the former. In other words, all of your religious practices. Because you're experts. Jesus is saying, look, you do those things well. I mean, you've got the system together. You've been doing this. You're set apart, and you really do strive after, keeping the law and following God's law and being obedient. You do all of those things. But you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. In other words, you've kind of set aside and you've avoided those who are outcasts. But I'm telling you, you've missed something. How have you done this? Why am I having to say this on God's behalf once again after all of these years, all of these centuries have passed, and we're still struggling with the same thing? It's hypocrisy because you're saying one thing, but you're doing another. You're teaching one thing, but you're living another way. And I'm just telling you, it is like an emptiness. See, I know what's in your heart, and I'm actually concerned about what's in your heart. And right now, your heart is empty. And so your practices are empty. They're really meaningless because you have used other people and those who are not as smart as you and not as wise as you and not as, holy and set apart as you. You've used them to your advantage, and you've simply made yourself look really good by doing all of these things. And you've missed it. How could you have missed it? Have you forgotten? Jesus is saying, look, have you forgotten what I've done for you? Have you forgotten the mercy that was provided to you? Just a few chapters before that, Matthew records a parable that Jesus tells, and I think it illustrates this beautifully. A parable is just a story. It's a made-up story, and Jesus often used parables to teach things. It's like, when a preacher uses a story in order to illustrate a point, and that was kind of the idea. And Jesus was a master storyteller, and so he would make up these stories in order to essentially teach a truth or a point or a principle, to really drive something home. And so on this particular occasion, Jesus is in Matthew chapter 18, he's sharing this parable. We call it the parable of the unmerciful servant, but we just made that up just a way to remember it, okay? And it's great. But listen to this. Let me just read through this, point some things out. Therefore, Jesus is telling this story to his disciples and the people listening. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. So a king or a master is settling accounts, he's doing justice. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Now, here's why I think Jesus says something like, because again, he's making this up. I think Jesus, in order to really make his point, exaggerates some of the details. Let me just lay it on thick. In other words, you've got this guy who owes his master, because he's a servant, which means he's basically a slave, a house slave. He's somebody who is kind of underneath, and he's less than, he's lower. And there's no way, Jesus is setting this up where his audience would know there's no way this servant could possibly settle this account. There's no paying this back. 10,000 bags of gold. I mean, he owes this guy hundreds of thousands of dollars and no real way to pay it back. Since he was not able to pay, couldn't do it on his own, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. Now, here's the thing. We read that and we're like, that's gross. I can't believe that. Why would, are you kidding me? Sell him? Sell his family, even his kids, in order to repay the debt? But isn't that justice? Isn't that justice? That's what justice would say. In other words, making things right. This guy owed a lot of money. Maybe, he got in over his head. He borrowed for, a gambling habit or whatever it was, or maybe he had just kind of taken care of him for years and years and borrowed a lot. And so he just kind of had gotten to a place where, he was in way over his head. And yet, the master is just doing justice. It's not wrong, is it? That's for you to decide. It just kind of feels a little gross. But the servant heard this, and so he fell on his knees before him. And he says, "Be patient with me," he begged. This is Jesus telling this story, right? "And I will pay back everything." He falls to his knees and he begs for what? He begs for mercy. I can't do it. I can't repay it. Well, the servant's master took pity on him and he canceled the debt and let him go. Wow. Well, wait a minute. Does anybody in here go, well, that's not justice? Not good. I can't believe he did that. Justice was not served here. He deserved to have to pay that. He's the one that got into all that debt, got into all that trouble. It's his responsibility to pay it back. And yet there's something so moving about what this master did, because he was the one in authority. He was the one who had the power. And he exercised his power not for his own advantage or benefit, but for the servant on his knees before him. So he lets him go, cancels the debt, and he walks out a free man. But when that servant walked out, he found one of his fellow servants, one of his colleagues. They work together. But he owed him 100 silver coins. In other words, a drop in the bucket. It's like, I owed my master hundreds of thousands of dollars, but this guy owes me about $50 because, we were, betting the other, on some fantasy football, and he lost. And so, he owes me. That was a joke. It wasn't anything about fantasy football. I'm going to lose, by the way. I'm just going to. he grabbed him and began to choke him. I mean, Jesus really just lathering it on. It's like, this was bad. I mean, this is a dramatic scene in a daytime soap opera is what's going on. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. And we all kind of get grossed out by that, right? It's like, oh, I can't believe he's doing that. His fellow servant fell to his knees, did the very same thing, took the very same posture and begged him, be patient with me and I'll pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. After all, wasn't that his right? Wasn't that justice? I mean, it was within his right to be able to demand repayment. Even though he had been forgiven his debt, it didn't matter. Like he's still, I mean, it's still justice, right? What is it, though? What's different? Why does this bother us and bother Jesus' audience for sure? Even the people within the story that Jesus is making up are bothered by this. What is it that really bothers us? So and all the other servants, they saw what happened. They were bothered too. They were outraged. They were angry. And they went and told their master everything that had happened. I mean, it's like you just want to reach across the table and grab that guy and like throat punch him. You know what I'm saying? I can't believe you. Did you forget the mercy that had just been granted to you? How in the world could you not grant mercy to your colleague? So the master called this guy back in and said, you wicked servant, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Have you forgotten? Have you already forgotten like that quickly? Jesus is kind of just, really painting the picture here. Have you forgotten what I've done for you? Don't you remember that enormous debt? And all you did was get on your knees and beg me for more time. And I didn't just give you more time, I canceled it. I canceled all of that debt. So shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? Shouldn't you have done the same? I mean, this king, this master saying, I can't believe it. And it's what you and I feel like too when we hear a story like that, especially a real life story. Like if we had never read this before and we heard it for the first time, or we watched it like happen in real life, we become like, that's what we would call, that's just righteous anger. Like we get mad at that stuff. I mean, it just bothers us, I mean, it's like our own kids. It's like, wait a minute. I just told you could play a little bit longer. I granted you access to your iPad. I told you weren't going to be able to early in the day, but I'm letting you anyway, even though you've been a real pain today. But now you've turned around and you won't even share it with your brother. Like, are you serious? I gave you mercy and you won't show mercy. I mean, what is it about that? Because it's justice. I mean, in this case, it's justice. Well, there's something about mercy that can be more just. Essentially, this master is saying, have you forgotten the magnitude of the mercy I have shown to you? Because maybe you've forgotten just the weight of it. Just maybe you've forgotten how big it really is. Maybe you've forgotten. Because if you've forgotten just how big the mercy was that I granted to you, then maybe that's why you're not willing to offer it to somebody else. In other words, this is essentially what was happening. Only when you understand your need for mercy and the magnitude of mercy will you be able to extend mercy. You know this is true. We're all this way. We are much less likely to be willing to extend mercy in a particular situation when we don't even remember ever having a need for that kind of mercy or ever having received it. It's like, well, I mean, my boss never, let me off the hook, so I'm not letting you off the hook. Are you kidding me? You're fired. But mercy teaches us something different. You see, when we don't realize we need something, we don't turn around and give it to somebody else. Dallas Willard is a theologian, philosopher. Here's what he says about this. It's not psychologically possible for us really to know God's mercy for us and at the same time be hardened toward others. It is not even possible to not understand, to feel the weight and the magnitude of God's mercy for us and then turn around and not offer it toward others. We can't. It's just not even possible. If you don't recognize your need for mercy, you'll never turn around and give mercy. In other words, to put it very simply, to put it very simply, God's mercy toward us should give rise to our mercy toward others. God's mercy toward us should give rise to our mercy toward others. Now here's the thing. There's pushback. I get it. And rightly so. You know, because we all have kind of our scenario of what this means and what this looks like. And the reason there's pushback is because there's some things that come into our minds, you know, some scenarios, some situations, and it bothers us a little bit. And it's like, well, Jesus is making this story up. Does that mean I have to do it? Well, you know, I mean, he's teaching a truth. He's teaching something very real that he wants us to actually learn, and not just learn and know, but then to put into action and implement. But it just gives rise to something in us. Because we think, you know, well, what about this situation? Or what about that situation? Or you know, how does it apply here? Because it's just not that easy, is it? It's complicated. I mean, mercy is complicated, really. Isn't it? I mean, don't we find ourselves essentially asking the question, how much mercy is enough? You know? I mean, I've heard it this week. Just based on our message last week and kind of where we started. And yet, there's just something about mercy that just, you know, makes us a little nervous. It's like, isn't there a place where I'm supposed to draw some lines? I mean, isn't there, you know, well, that's enough mercy, or, you know, I've taken things a little too far. I need to draw some lines and I need to create some boundaries. And I would say, yeah, probably. I don't know where they are. That's the thing. I wouldn't know how to answer that question for you. I mean, isn't there a point at which an employer would have to say, you've just shown up too many times late? I've got to draw the line. Or, you know, a parent who has to draw the line with their child because they're living contrary to what you wanted for them. And there's just a point where you create some boundaries and some lines. It's like you've given mercy, you've been merciful, but at some point it's like, you know, how far is too far? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I want to pose something to you. Do we really even have to ask this question? Here's why I say that. When was the last time you erred on the side of giving too much mercy? You know? And how much damage did that really do? You see, I don't think we struggle with the not giving too much mercy. Like, I think we just don't give enough at all. I think maybe, perhaps, we should be less concerned, and it doesn't mean we can't be concerned, but maybe less concerned about enabling people and more concerned with restoring people. I don't think this is a question we really have to ask. If we're really convinced of God's mercy for us, we will desire to give mercy to the people around us. So my question is this: have you experienced your need for and the magnitude of mercy? I mean, that's really the weighty question. Have you experienced it? Have you felt the weight of it? When was the last time you remembered just how much you needed God's mercy in your life? The weight of and the guilt of your sin and your past and your hang-ups and your addictions and your issues. When's the last time you considered that and said, man, so true. I had to be on my knees and beg God for mercy, and yet he just gave it to me. He canceled that debt. He sent Jesus. Wow. That is huge. I can't believe he did that. I owed everything. And he showed mercy, he took pity, and he wiped the slate clean. Wow. I know this feels like I don't really know what to do. In this situation, I feel like I need to draw some lines, but I'm just going to stop asking that question at this point and just push as much as I can into the realm of mercy, because justice won't happen. Justice, restorative justice won't happen unless there is a wealth of mercy. It just won't. You'll see a need. You'll see that there's some brokenness, that there's some issues, there's some problems, there's a break in shalom in that person's life or some area of their life. But without mercy, you will not bring and be willing to bring restorative justice. That only comes through mercy. And the only way you're going to be willing to offer mercy is by recognizing your own need for it. I know it's expensive. Mercy is expensive. It's expensive for governments to offer mercy to those who are oppressed and those who are in great need. It's expensive for parents. It's expensive for children. It's expensive for spouses. It's expensive for employers. Mercy is expensive. But have we forgotten the expense that God paid in sending his son, Jesus? That we can't forget. Heavenly Father, would you remind us, would you burden us with our own sense of guilt so that we're reminded of what you have done for us? Those are the ones who get it. Those are the ones who are willing to provide mercy to people, because they know their need. They see their need. They sense it. They feel the weight and the magnitude of mercy, the mercy that was offered to them. That is what true justice looks like, because it's true justice. It's doing justice, but loving mercy. And the only way that happens is when we walk humbly with you. Would you give us the courage to live that way? To default on the side of mercy for others and for you, in Jesus' name. If you would, keep your heads bowed for just a second. I'm just going to ask, even if you're at home, watching online later, if you'd keep your heads bowed for just a second, I just want to ask, maybe you don't recognize your need for mercy because you've never received it. And I just want to ask you, do you know that you need it? Do you know that there's brokenness in your life that needs restoration? Guess what? I've got good news. Jesus has canceled that debt, and he has offered mercy to you. And so I just want to give you an opportunity to receive that mercy. I promise you, it will change your life. And you can just pray right where you are, something like this. Just say, Jesus, I know I need mercy. I am a mess. I am broken. I feel separated. I feel like something just isn't quite right. And I know that you can make it right. I am a sinner, and I know I need a restoring Savior. His name is Jesus. And so I receive your gift of mercy in my life. And I give you the rest of my life. In the saving name of Jesus, amen.